Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm here today with Lee Donaldson at his home in Pittsburgh, and he served in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives from 1955 to 1970. I'm so happy to be here with you today to talk about your experiences. Thank you for inviting us to your home.
Well, thank you for coming.
I wanted to begin by asking about your childhood and your early family life and how you feel that prepared you for public service.
Well, I was born in the borough of Etna, which is about 7 miles south of here. One of two children. I was the older, and my father was a pharmacist in Etna, and he became what would now be a mayor, was then the Burgess of Etna. It was obviously a political job, and actually he ran for the General Assembly in 1934, but that was not a very good Republican year, and he did not win. But that sort of always was in my system, I think, and that got me interested in it. And I graduated from Etna High School and went on to Allegheny College and to service in the U.S. Army and to Pitt Law School, and got married, had a family, and ran for the General Assembly in 1954. That's right, yeah.
So would you say your family was active in politics?
Oh, absolutely.
Your father introduced
my father
you?
was active in politics.
Was your family always Republican?
Yes. That's true.
Is that how you decided to become a Republican?
Oh, I think undoubtedly that had an influence on me, sure.
Well, what kind of Republican would you say you were? Or are, I'm sorry.
I still am, and I think I'm what would now be classified as a moderate Republican, the old-style Eastern Republican, which becoming a sort of a lost species, unfortunately in my opinion, but that's, I think, the story of that.
Could you talk a little bit more about your schooling and how you feel that your schooling and your career prior to coming to the House of Representatives prepared you for the experiences that you would have there?
Well, at Allegheny I had a history and political science major, and actively followed the political life in the state and in the nation. And then getting out of law school, I think that, you have court systems and all these quasi-legal things. It's just sort of a natural bent. And what really happened was that in those days, we had what are known as multi-member districts. In other words, all of the boroughs and township in Allegheny County north of the rivers, from Sewickley all the way up to Tarentum and Harrison Township, was one legislative district with 4 members elected at large. This was all a gerrymandering thing that had been set up to assure, in this case, the thought was there'd be 4 Republican members, and there almost always were. And then they reapportioned in 1953. The district went from 2 to 4 members. That's what happened. So that left 2 wide open spots, and like a spot to run. And I recall there were 17 Republicans running for those 4 seats in the primary election of that year, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the nominees, and then was elected in November.
Would you say the Republican Party was very strong? Did they support you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, actually, there was a bitter primary fight in the Republican Party between the followers of Governor Fine, who were on one side, and many other elected officials, the incumbent congressman and senator and district attorney, who were on the other side. And it's hard to imagine, but there was a fight down to the district level. Each side had candidates for district committeemen, all the way down to that level. It's hard to imagine, but they did. And I happened to be chosen for no particular reason, I don't think, by the side that prevailed in the thing. That's why I was nominated. Sorry about that. Terry will get that, I think.
Okay.
She did. Okay. Okay, so that's how I came on the scene, so to speak.
Okay. Could I ask you about your military experiences?
I was in the Army at the end of World War II and served in the Army of Occupation in the 1st Cavalry in Japan. But there was no combat action at that time. The war was over by the time I got there.
Okay. Were there veterans that served with you in the House that had similar?
Oh, there were many veterans, sure, that had a lot of very active service. Many of them.
Do you think that that had any role in the legislature at the time?
Do I think that affected their
outlook?
Yeah, I think it did to some extent. They formed a kind of a camaraderie of their own, so to speak, and particularly on our side in the northern tier counties, you had Ken Lee, who became Speaker of the House, and Evan Williams, who became a judge in Joe Hepford in Dauphin County, and Warren Spencer in Tioga County. They were all, I believe they were all Air Force officers, and they were very close throughout the whole thing, and formed a sort of a caucus within a caucus.
Well, I wanted to ask you about, you said you had a bitter primary. What was the general like? The general election, your first time?
Let's see, the general election in 1954, there had been, I believe, 4 successive Republican governors. Now, in those days, the governor could not succeed himself, so there were 4 Republican governors, would be 16 years. But that year, the Republican candidate was Lloyd Wood, who I believe was he was an active senator, he was lieutenant governor, I think. And the Democratic candidate was George Leader, who was a young, good-looking, aggressive Democratic senator from York County, who represented a change and something different than the status quo. And he won pretty easily, so the Democrats won the House, but in the old 17th legislative district, the Republican ticket did prevail there.
Well, did you like to campaign?
Did I like to campaign? Well, yeah, I liked it, but the district was so big. To get from one end of it to the other, you know, if you had a meeting up in Harrison Township and one down below Sewickley, you had a half day's travel involved. That's if you could find the place that the meeting was being held. So I enjoyed it. Yeah, I did enjoy it.
Well, you had, I think 11 campaigns, if I counted correctly. What was your campaign process, and what types of campaign activities did you involve yourself in?
Well, yeah, you have to remember that in those days, this job didn't pay any money to amount to anything. And so the amount of the resources you had available was really quite limited. There was a fairly strong party organization. The Democratic organization was much stronger because they held, you know, the bulk of the city and county offices. But the Republican organization itself had some funds and made funds available, and that's really where the financing, whatever it was, came, which really amounted to slate cards and buttons and that sort of thing. I mean, we never did any television or radio or newspaper, anything like that.
Do you remember roughly how much a campaign would have cost in those days?
Would have cost? My personal campaign?
Yeah.
I think maybe when I was majority leader, I might have spent something like $4,000 or $5,000, maybe. And certainly wouldn't have been any more than that. And in the early days, I didn't have any money. I didn't spend any money.
I think we looked at some of the totals, and I think you always came in first and maybe one time second in whenever it was the at-large membership. So
yeah, that's my recollection of it.
Yeah, so you seemed to be a pretty popular candidate.
Well, I had good geography, and that's the way the count came.
Okay. Well, could you explain just a little bit more, because I think a lot of people that may be interested in history of the House. What was it like serving as a member with 4 other individuals? Did you have differing opinions on things and how things should be run, as opposed to being one candidate?
In our case, we really got along pretty well, and for the most part, we would ride back and forth to Harrisburg together, and we stayed in the same hotel, and we really got along pretty well. There were two older gentlemen, and then I was then younger, as was my colleague Chick Agnew, who had a brilliant career ahead of him, died unfortunately at a very, very young age.
Who were the other two gentlemen?
Lawrence Gibb from Swickley, and Ray Wilt from Ross Township. Ray was the senior guy. He was an incumbent. He was elected, I believe, first time in 1950. And he was a grand old, he wasn't old, but a grand gentleman. He was quite a good businessman. He was very, very much interested. As a matter of fact, his son served as a state senator. And the last time I was in Harrisburg, which totally amazed me, I took my grandkids down there, and a young man came up to me on the floor and said, "Mr. Donaldson, you don't remember, but you served with my grandfather." I want to tell you, that makes you feel kind of old.
Yeah. So what was it like then whenever they decided to go with the one man, one vote, and you were given the 30th House District?
Right, that's right. We had moved actually to this house. We had built this house in Hampton Township, and frankly, one of the reasons that I moved into Hampton Township was basically in the center of that legislative district, and I thought, no matter which way this goes, I'm going to be in very fair shape here.
So redistricting didn't have any parts of, because it sounded like you centered yourself fairly well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Hampton was a good place to be in for the district at that time.
Do you think it was easier serving, one state representative?
I do. Sure, I do. Because you were responsible for yourself. You didn't have to, before you were always a little bit worried whether the other three guys thinking about and so forth. Yeah, I think it was much easier. And I think it's a much better system, too. The other was simply, it was a gerrymandering process, which was used in many places, not just in Pennsylvania.
Well, could you describe this area? What were the people like? What were their issues, politically speaking, as well?
In this area?
Yeah.
In the old still the 30th legislative district, I guess. You had the mill towns of Etna and Sharpsburg. They were the old mill towns. And then you had the newer suburban districts coming out in Shaler and Hampton, and then you had the Fox Chapel area, which was a very exclusive residential area. So you had a pretty good mixture, and the political registration was always pretty much even. There was usually a slight Democratic edge, but in a one-party county, basically, the registration doesn't always count, because people register maybe because they want to be in the majority, but perhaps they vote another way. And I think that was true here, because the district has been, with one exception, has elected Republicans ever since.
What do you think it's like serving so close to Pittsburgh? Does that pose any special concerns or problems for you?
I think it does, because, but Pittsburgh is no longer the megapolis that it once was. The population is gone from 750,000 to 325,000 or something like that. But there is a consciousness, I think, that Pittsburgh's important, real important to the region, and it's Pittsburgh's problems are our problems too. Now, that isn't the most popular view sometimes in the suburb, but I think it's true, and I think it has to be recognized, and I think more and more political figures are recognizing that.
Did you ever have a district office?
Did I ever have a district office?
Yes.
Never had one that was paid for. We had a law office out here that we kind of used for a political, we did use for a political office, but the Commonwealth didn't pay for it.
We had noticed, I think on some, maybe from the Pennsylvania Manual, that the first National Bank building, the Frick building in Pittsburgh.
Oh, that's where I had my first law office.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah, but that was before I was in the legislature.
Okay, okay. Well, how did you stay in touch with your constituents?
With my constituents?
Yes.
Well, you know, you went to political meetings, you went to other meetings not of a political nature. You went to church. You went to. I was very active in the Aetna Elks and belonged to the American Legion. You did all these kinds of things, and you know, you lived in the district and you knew the people.
So, the community leader.
Yeah, but I mean, as I said before, we didn't have any television or radio or anything of that nature.
Mm-hmm. No mailings, like.
We might have done maybe do a mailing in a campaign, maybe.
Okay. Well, could you describe your experiences during your first swearing-in ceremony and how you felt?
Well, I think the first, my wife Terry, whom you just met, we had no idea what was going to happen, and I was apparently going to be the only member-elect who did not have flowers on his desk, and somebody at the last minute got hold of Terry. She got some flowers. But it was for me kind of an awesome experience. You know, I mean, all the greats and near greats that you'd heard of were around there, and you were just, I think I was the youngest member of the General Assembly then. I was 29 when I was sworn in.
Well, do you recall what your first office was like in Harrisburg?
Office?
Yes. Did you have an office?
When we got there, you got $600 when you were sworn in. You got a roll of stamps. I think there were 300 stamps. There might have been 500. I'm not sure of that. You got a locker in a locker room. You got a desk on the floor of the house. Then the 1st of February you got $600. 1st of March you got $600. 1st of April you got $600. We were doing good. But the last $600 you didn't get until the end of the session, which happened to be May of the following year. So, and then I think you got a nickel a mile. Transportation, and then it became a dime later on. So we didn't have any office, or any secretary, we didn't have any of that.
So
I know that sounds crazy, but that's the way it was.
So you answered your own letter, like if somebody would write you a letter, you would answer it yourself?
Yeah, they had a secretarial pool in Harrisburg of about, I think there were about 10 or 12 girls that presumably you had access to, but the problem was, as soon as the session ended, we went home, because we had to make a living and do things. So you never had an opportunity really to utilize that unless you lived in Dauphin or one of the nearby counties, you know. So yeah, if we got letters, we answered. Well, I had a law office, and I obviously answered them through them. Okay. And most people did it in that fashion.
I think people, especially you know, that are involved in the legislature now, forget that the legislature at the time that you served was presumably part-time. It was a.
We did not consider it a full-time position in any way, shape, or form. And I've always sort of got a kick out of the Pittsburgh newspapers, and I assume the other metropolitan newspapers, were always for this full-time legislature. They were always for it. Well, now they have it, and they're not very happy about that either.
Well, do you have any thoughts on that? Is it better to be a part-time legislature with?
It's never going to come back to that part-time. That's just never going to happen. Is there enough legislative business to occupy anybody full-time? I don't think anybody really thinks that. But they do such great constituent service that I think there's some value to people by having that available to them, and that can keep them busy. And of course, the job now is much more like a full-time occupation, and therefore people work at it in that fashion.
What was your experience whenever you first viewed the process of the House floor, the House in action? People up in the gallery sometimes don't understand everything that's going on.
You know, that's completely understandable.
What did you think as the first time you witnessed it for yourself?
Well, let me put it this way. I told you that one of my colleagues was Lawrence Gibb from Swickley, and he was an old-time politician. He'd been a World War I guy and a World War II guy, and I don't think he ever left the government payroll, and he was the greatest exponent of private enterprise I ever knew. And he said to me one day, he said, "Boy, if this is the best government ever devised by man, I sure as hell pity those people who live anyplace else." But that's an exaggeration. It is, you know, it's a slow kind of process, and it's a frustrating process. It's frustrating if you're attempting to run it, and it's frustrating if you're attempting to work within it. And you say people in the gallery, I'm sure they have no idea of what's happening, and yet I still think it probably is the best government ever devised by man.
Do you recall who you sat near on the House floor?
Yeah, we sat in assigned seats, and we were assigned by counties. All the Allegheny County guys sat together, and the four of us were in four seats. And now one of the things, they don't have them anymore, I don't believe it, I believe beside each chair was a spittoon.
Yeah, those are no longer there.
No, I'm sure they're not. No, they left in my time, but they were there when I got there.
Even at the female
Oh, you know,
members?
I don't know that.
Oh, I was just
there
wondering.
weren't many of those, by the way.
Right.
Initially, there weren't very many female members.
Yeah. So as you rose through the ranks, did your seat change? And
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, we developed the concept that behind the floor leader and the whip, you'd have four seats that were occupied by people that you thought were instrumental in attempting to do whatever you were attempting to do. So I moved up into that area and then up front beyond that.
do you feel that anybody mentored you whenever you first came to Harrisburg? Did they show you the ropes? Or?
Senator Bob Fleming, as much as anybody, he was. I think he went to Harrisburg in 1938, and I think he went to in the House, and he went to the Senate in 1950, and he was from Aspinwall, which is a couple of miles from where I lived, and I knew him. Yeah, he would have been a mentor.
Did you have the opportunity to mentor anybody?
Did I?
Yes.
Well, I like to think that I mentored Rick Sesser, and all fairness, he did all this himself, but he did come to Harrisburg as my administrative assistant and worked in our office for 4 years, and then when I did not run for re-election, he ran and served a long time, very successfully, and was very popular, very well liked, and deservedly so.
What role did lobbyists serve during your time there?
Lobbyists were important. They were particularly, we always thought, important in the Senate with the, what were the three great ones, were the Sun Oil and the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Pennsylvania manufacturers. They had three lobbyists who, as I recall, they sat on the floor of the Senate. They had seats just like the senators had, not quite there, but right next to them. They were never quite that. I don't think they paid that much attention to the House, to tell you the truth. But lobbyists were there from the various industries, and you know, you knew them, particularly the ones. We would know the ones out of Pittsburgh, particularly, representing various corporations, labor unions.
Why do you think that they paid more attention to the Senate than to the House?
Well, maybe it was, in a sense, more manageable. Members there tended to have served for a long time, and everybody knew one another and knew where everybody was going, I think, more so than in the House, which had a kind of a rapid turnover, at least in the early days.
Okay. Well, you acted as Speaker Pro Tem on several occasions throughout your tenure. What was that like?
Well, that's right, I was Speaker Pro Tem. You just presided. You didn't. I didn't exercise any of the powers of the Speaker other than just handling the debate on the floor of the House, the business of the House.
But isn't it quite an honor to be selected to serve as Speaker Pro Tem?
Well,
at least today, in my...
Okay. I just thought we were filling in, to tell you the truth.
I was wondering, since you're playing it very low key here, if it was something, if it was a similar honor that was.
Honestly, I just never thought about it in that light.
Okay. Well, what was your relationship like with the other members of leadership at the time?
Who?
The other members of leadership at the time. Since you were a leader yourself.
Yeah. Well,
what were their leadership styles like? Might be a.
There, particularly when you're the floor leader and the governors of your party, you always have a problem, and it was a big problem. Your members think you're being managed by the governor, and the governor is convinced that you're not upholding his platform as you should be because you're paying attention to your guys. And in truth, you got to do both. And that's a difficult balancing act, and I'm not sure that I did it as well as it should have been done.
Why do you think that?
Well, in the Schaefer administration, we had problems. He succeeded a very popular governor, a deservedly popular governor, and the Scranton administration had initiated many outstanding fine programs. Never had to pay for them because they were just being initiated. Then Schaefer inherited these beautiful programs and the bills, and we never, ever, ever could get the money to fund it. That was an ongoing problem the 4 years that I was in the leadership.
And then I think after you left, I think that's when they had the income tax.
That's right. But when I was there, it was an article of faith that the Republican would ever be for an income. I don't think that was exactly correct, but that's the way it was deemed.
Well, who was the speaker whenever you were majority leader?
Ken Lee.
Ken Lee. What was he like to work with?
Ken and I had a pretty good relationship, but unfortunately, he and the governor did not have such a good relationship, and that sort of epitomized the attempt to balance the two. But Ken was, I think, a good speaker. He was a powerful speaker. But by and large, we got along well, and I have great respect for him as an individual.
And who was your whip?
Bob Butera.
Bob Butera. Good relationship with Bob?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
He had, I think, probably the right idea about things. He never seemed to get too worked up or too upset, and he kept the low profile, basically. But he was very, very bright, and he was very good. And I think he's still on the scene in Harrisburg to some extent. I haven't talked to him in a long while, but I have, again, a great deal of respect for him.
What about on the Democratic side?
The Democratic side, Herb Feinman was the Democratic leader, and then the speaker, and Leroy Urbis was the whip, and then the floor leader. In the 4 years that I was floor leader, and they were both very, very able guys, very, very able guys. I had a good personal relationship with Lee Urbis. In fact, by and large, the Allegheny County members, R's and D's, got along well. They would disagree on measures, and they vote differently on measures, but they would get along. They were personally friendly. Speaker Feinman was a little bit different. He could be abrasive at times. He was a very good leader for his party. He did a good job for them. He was a very tough competitor.
You had several debates with him, I think.
Oh, I'm sure we did. I'm sure we did.
I was going to say two attorneys.
But as hard as it was to debate Herb Feynman, and it was, he would make these wonderful speeches, you know, and I'd look at my guys and, what am I going to do now? You know? But, you know, you had to come up with something.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think it was easier for you to be a minority leader or a majority leader? We've talked to people that have been both, and
oh, I'd far rather be the majority leader. I'd far rather be the majority. Easier? Yeah, it's easier to be a minority leader.
How about whenever the governor's of a different party?
Well, see, I never had that experience
Okay.
personally. The only 4 years that I was the floor leader there was a Republican governor,
Okay.
whom I think really never got the credit that he deserved. As I say, he really inherited a debt that wasn't of his making, and that was like a ball and chain around him all the 4 years. We never did get over it.
Well, how did you decide to run for leadership?
Oh, I suppose everybody, I'm sure that every member there would like to be a leader. You know, it's a natural thing, I think. Yeah, just a natural thing. I don't know if there was any great hue and demand that I be the leader, but that's the way it worked out.
Did you have any leadership posts before becoming leader?
Yeah, we had what we called a policy committee on the Republican side, and I was the chairman of that for a couple of years. Well,
what was it like in caucus at the time that you served? What was your caucuses like?
Well, they were very difficult. They were very, very difficult. Always on this, almost always on the finance problem. You know, if we couldn't get the money, we really couldn't operate, and so we'd come up with these marvelous ideas and present them to the caucus. And I think we only had 102 or 103 members. We had a bare majority. And we had a couple of guys who were not going to vote for any taxes. I mean, they weren't, you know. So we'd go through this whole litany of things, and everybody would make speeches, and then we'd take the roll call, and no, and yeah, there you go again.
So would you say that basically the financial crisis was the major concern
Oh,
at your
absolutely,
time?
absolutely. I think, and I guess I said it so many times that I have a plaque that the Republican caucus presented me when I left. I would always say, well, you know, okay, not today on the floor of the House, but someday.
Well, what do you think the schedule of a leader is? What types of activities did you involve yourself in, like on a day-to-day basis? You know, did you have lots of meetings with the governor's staff?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you were always meeting. Sure, you were always meeting with the governor, and then of course when particularly when you had a Democratic-controlled House, you had to meet either with them individually or meet with them with the governor and attempt to work out something on legislation. And you worked on the calendar all the time. I mean, because you always had bills on the calendar that maybe the administration wasn't concerned about, or I wasn't concerned about, but I had members who were gung ho about them, and you gotta do that too. And so you were always, you were busy with the calendar, as busy as I was very busy with that. I know that.
Well, I want to read you something. In your farewell speech, you mentioned that the lack of continuity and leadership is a problem for the organization of the House and the parties. Do you still feel that way, and could you explain your comment at the time?
I don't have any recollection of making that statement, and
I wasn't sure if there was a lot of change in the leadership at the time. And
no, there really wasn't a lot of change, as I recall it.
Okay.
I don't know where that, if you're quoting my guess
Yeah.
correctly, I'm sure correctly, I just don't recall it.
Okay.
That was a pretty good speech by and large, I thought, even though that part of it I don't remember.
Oh, well, sorry. I wanted to ask you about the changes in the House structure while you were there. Were you a witness to any of those?
Oh yeah, I think we were just getting into the concept of a full-time legislator with money. The caucuses would have money, and the leaders would have money, and I think Herb Feynman and Bob Fleming were really key players in that. Both of them saw the independence of the of the House or of the Senate, or at least of their caucus in the House or Senate, as being very, very important. And that's when we started to create these funds for various purposes that we never had before. When I became floor leader, the floor leader wasn't even paid. They had a contingent fund of $6,000, I think it was, and nobody really knew what that was for. Nobody knew what that was for. And whether you took somebody to dinner with that, or whether you did this or that or the other thing, nobody quite knew. And that was terrible. And I was glad we finally did get that converted into. I think that was the salary, $6,000, and the whip got $2,500 or something like that. And I think that was a far better system. They get a little more money than that now, I assume.
Mm-hmm. What about the professionalization? Did your staff increase at all? Did you get any more staff since you had none?
Yeah, no, they were starting to build staff. They were starting to build staff. Yeah, because if the one side got staff, it was always pretty well understood the other guys would get about the same. That your staffing began to increase. Yeah, it was hard when I first got there. There wasn't anybody there to mount anything. Mm-hmm. I think when Stu Helm was Speaker of the House, I think he had a page and a secretary, and I think that was it.
Well, how many staff did you have whenever you were leader?
Oh, I don't have any idea. I don't have any idea anymore.
Okay.
And they weren't all mine either. They would be assigned to different committees and that sort of thing.
Okay.
I don't recall my own staff being significantly large.
Now, I've heard about, the professionalization and kind of creating these special funds so that the legislature could stand independent of the governor.
Right. That's the idea of it.
Do you think there's merit there?
I think there's some merit there. Yeah. I think there's always a danger that they become havens for political hangers-on too, and I think some of that happens. Mm-hmm. Or I shouldn't say it. I don't know what happens now. Some of it was happening back then.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Constitutional Convention, mm-hmm. if you wouldn't mind. What was your involvement, and what was going on?
Well, that was Schaefer's idea. I think he felt, and I think rightfully so, that this was a thing that he could do that other governors had been unable to do. Even his popular governor, as Bill Scranton, was unable to achieve that. Then the question became how you were going to do it. Initially, I think everybody thought it would be a complete constitutional convention. Well, it became apparent we couldn't get that passed. There's always opposition to change, mm-hmm. and there was very strong opposition, particularly in the Senate, to any constitutional convention at all. And George Hounsfield is one of the guys who helped to work out the differences, because we had to work out differences with the Democrats and with the Senate, and they came up with this idea for a limited constitutional convention to attack what was felt were the major problems with the existing Pennsylvania Constitution. And as it turned out, I don't think it was a bad idea, because we got it done. And then they got this idea, it was kind of a brilliant idea, of electing delegates from three, I think there were three from each senatorial district, but two majority and one minority. That was all, euchred into the thing, and That worked out okay. And then we put the legislative leadership in as delegates. We just did that. I think there were maybe 10 or 12 legislative delegates in the thing. And but when it first met, we in the legislature thought we would be we'd run this thing just like we ran the House and the Senate. That's what we thought we'd do. Well, these citizen soldiers who came, they weren't going to buy that. Many of them were, they were really sort of against the legislature. You know, that's understandable. That was understandable. And Lieutenant Governor Broderick, I think we caucused once as Republicans. I think one caucus, we assumed we'd be caucusing every day. And I don't know if the Democrats caucused any more than that, I don't know. And Broderick, to his credit, he let us know bright and early that this wasn't the way it's going to be, that there were going to be co-chairmen. We never heard of such a thing. We had a majority, you know, we would run it. But we had co-chairmen of the various committees. And I think by and large it worked out very well. And I think that Ray Schaefer really deserved a lot of credit that he never achieved that, because that convention did modernize the Pennsylvania Constitution to some extent.
Well, what were the issues that they were trying to?
Well, the issues were finance. You know, we had some ridiculous debt limitation. You had to go out and borrow bond money all the time, and we got rid of that. We did some things in the local government area. Now, many people thought that the big thing was the size of the General Assembly. That was a hot topic, of course, and I'm sure that there were a majority in that convention who really wanted to see the size of the legislature reduced. But they could never quite get their ducks in order. And, you know, the legislative members weren't going to be for that. Philosophically, you could certainly make good argument for it, but you know, if you were the leader of your 102 or 103, they didn't want to go down to 68 or 70. So they never, nothing was accomplished there. We modernized the judiciary, unified the judiciary, and that's worked well, I believe. Probably might have been better had we gone to some kind of manner of selecting at least appellate court judges in some merit fashion rather than election at the polls, but that was never accomplished either. So all in all, I think it was a pretty successful operation. It did, though, mean that the governor diluted a lot of the political capital that as an incoming executive he had, because some of the people went along with that did so very reluctantly, and with the idea that they weren't going to go any next steps out of the way. But that's it. That's the way it worked out.
Well, right now, as you know, the House is looking at reforming itself in Harrisburg. And
yeah, I think they're coming up with some good ideas, too. Are they going to reduce the size? I'll be surprised if they do that. I'll be surprised if they do that. But maybe they will.
Well, I just think it's interesting that these same issues continue to
absolutely.
To come up.
Absolutely. Sure.
Well, let me see. I'd like to talk a little bit about your legislation now that you were involved in. I'm going to just ask you if there was anything that you are particularly proud of or that you would like to discuss.
I'm proud of the Constitutional Convention, and I think I played a significant role in getting that into being. There were a lot of other people also, but I feel I was instrumental in that.
Well, can I ask you how you feel you were instrumental? What was your role?
Well, in getting a bill crafted and then getting it passed in the legislature. And we worked long and hard at that because many Republican members weren't very enthusiastic about this. we had a lot of members from smaller rural counties that felt that this was probably going to mean a reduction in the size, which was going to affect them. So it was tough to get that through. But I think that was a big thing. I think, and I don't think Ray Schaefer would agree with me on this particularly, but I think that the Public Employees Relations Act was an important thing. It certainly was not a perfect bill, and we knew it wasn't a perfect bill. But what was happening was school teachers were striking. And a dear friend of mine was president of the Fox Chapel School Board, and the Fox Chapel teacher, this is a very important school, went on strike, and I remember he got on the television and he said, either they come back to work or they go to jail, you know. And Scotty, that ain't never going to happen. That's just not going to happen. So the existing law wasn't working. The one we crafted had some defects. It's been improved since then, and I think it's as good as any in the nation, really. That was a hard sell for Republicans because, you know, it looked like it was going to be the end of patronage, maybe, if we were going to go this kind of route. I think one of the things that I was very interested in, I do think we did a good job on, was clean streams and environmental things in both the Scranton and the Schaefer administration. We were very cognizant of what should be done there, and then we really attempted to do some things, and I'm very proud of that.
Well, you served on several committees as well. The committees. Did you have a favorite committee that you were particularly fond of?
I suppose the Judiciary Committee.
Is that because of your background?
I think so. I think sure.
Okay. Do you recall any of the bills or any of the issues that were being dealt with in committee?
Well, one of the most horrendous, difficult issues that we faced was transportation for non-public school children. That was a bitter, divisive issue, and it got to be almost a church versus church kind of thing, because obviously the practical effect of the bill was to aid parochial schools. There were other private schools, but the vast majority were parochial schools, and I was representing public school districts at the time, and I had a lot of trouble with that one, and particularly when they found out that the bill as passed not only included the parochial schools, which everybody understood, but also included the private schools like Shadyside Academy. And when these school directors out in Hampton Township found out they were transporting kids to Shadyside Academy, that didn't make them very happy.
Well, did you belong to any informal caucuses? Was there an Allegheny County caucus, or?
Well, we would meet once in a while. You know, we would meet once in a while. I wouldn't call it a caucus, but we would meet once in a while. At one time, we had 18 Republican members from Allegheny County. Nobody could imagine that today, but we had 18. That was in the Eisenhower election in 1956. It was a big Republican year, and we had it well gerrymandered. We had 4 in the South Hills, 4 in the North Hills, 4 in the East Hills, and 4 in the city of Pittsburgh.
Wow. How many Democratic members were there?
I think there were probably, I could be wrong about this, but I think there may be 12 or 13. I could be wrong about that, but I believe we had more than they did for that short period of time.
Yeah. Well, we were just looking at some of the topics that you dealt with in your legislation, and it looked like you dealt with a lot of insurance issues as well, the civil service and appropriations, and many others. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about legislatively or with the committees?
No, but it is kind of funny how the problems really do recur. They come back again. The idea of the session the lame duck session. That's a bad idea. I don't think we ever did that. We might have, but I don't think we did. I don't think we ever met after the November election, even though the term didn't expire. And I think that's a terrible idea. And I understand that's one of the reforms that they're considering, and I think that would be a very, very good one. Reduction in the size of the legislature would make some sense. You know, in this day with transportation and communications the way it is, I mean, the arguments for that large block. When I first got there, there was one member for every county. So that Forest County, which I dearly love, we have a place up there, with 5,000 residents, had a member. And that, you know, you can't really justify that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we were reading some of your debates on the House floor with Stu Helm, Herb Feynman, Josh Alberger, and, and Leroy Orvis. Did you recall any of those debates, and did you have a particular favorite debater?
Lee Orvis. He was much better than I was. He was much more eloquent. But that was a real challenge.
And what were some of the issues you debated?
Well, by and large, they would be, you know, money for minorities or for inner cities or that sort of thing. And of course, that's an allocation of funds. Everybody recognizes that there are problems there. But Lee was so good when he would, and so eloquent when he would express them, and I always felt that I was doing the best I could, but I had a tough hand to play, I thought.
What do you think the hardest issue you encountered as a representative was?
The hardest issue?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it was that school busing. I think I lost friends.